Chapter 065 Dangerous Ground. Far to the north of Seoria, square in the middle of a heavily forested mountain range, there was a secluded valley devoid of any vegetation. Instead, it was covered in sharp, broken rocks of all shapes and sizes. There was no obvious reason for the place to be so lifeless and desolate, especially considering how verdant the surrounding mountains were. As he stood on a cliff overlooking the valley, Zorian wondered about that. Was the valley so rocky and desolate because of what made its home here, or was it the other way around and the valley's inhabitants had picked it precisely because it was so suitable for themselves? Probably the former, but one could never quite know. There could be some subtle geomantic magic surrounding the place. Zorian, Zack said, interrupting his thoughts. The view is nice, I guess. If you like rocks or something. But why the hell are we here, exactly? You have no appreciation for nature's wonders, Zorian sighed. Assuming this was actually a natural wonder, that is, and not something the earth elementals had done to make their home more comfy for themselves. Anyway, you were with me when we talked to that hunter community a few hours ago, weren't you? Yes, Zack nodded. You told them we're searching for elementals and they sent us here. Which is fine and all, but why are we searching for elementals all of a sudden? You should know by now that I really hate the whole mysterious act. If you don't start explaining things right now, I'm starting a wrestling match with you right here on the edge of this cliff. Zorian gave him an incredulous look, before pointing at the sharp, spike-like rocks at the bottom of the cliff. Don't think for a second I won't, Zack warned. One restart cut short is a small price to pay if it will teach you not to do this crap anymore. It wasn't anything sinister, Zorian sighed. It's just that it's a pretty crazy idea and I didn't want to bother you with it. I did say you could sit this one out, didn't I? You forget who you're talking to, Zack smiled widely. I'm the guy who fought the most infamous dragon of our time just to see if I could do it, descended as deep into the dungeon as I could before dying and took on the entire Ibisan invasion force all by myself. I'm no stranger to crazy ideas. True, Zorian said. Besides, Zack said, sounding more serious this time. We're in this together. Stop trying to do things alone, it's getting seriously annoying. Fine, I get it, said Zorian, raising his hands up in defeat. Look. The point of all this is to try and find where the other primordials are imprisoned. What? Zack asked incredulously. We're having so many problems with this Panaxith thing, and you want to find more? Yes, Zorian nodded. Well, maybe. As I said, it's a pretty crazy idea. It's just, I was thinking I might need to set loose a primordial into the world, and I realized that doing that with Panaxith wouldn't be a good idea. Panaxith's prison is in the middle of Seoria, and too much attention is already on it. So I thought, why don't I find my own primordial, then? One that is in some isolated place where nobody is going to disturb us while we work? Zack looked at him like he just declared he was secretly a shape-shifted dragon and started sprouting horns. You did this on purpose, didn't you? He asked. What, describe the idea in the most disturbing possible way? Zorian asked back with a smirk. Yeah. He shook his head. It's true, though, that's essentially what I was thinking about. Why, though? Zack asked. Is this about finding a way for you to leave the time loop? Zorian looked at his fellow time traveler in surprise. Don't be so surprised, Zack scoffed. You already told me how space itself seemed to collapse when Panaxith tried to leave his prison. It's natural to wonder if that kind of spatial hole could be used to fashion some kind of passage out of this place. I've thought of it too. Admittedly, I have no idea how you could actually go about doing that. Neither do I, Zorian admitted. But it's the only thing I could think of. Zack hummed thoughtfully. I thought you said the restart immediately collapsed when Panaxith got out of his prison, though? He said. Last I spoke to you, you thought Panaxith getting out of his box was one of the conditions for terminating the time loop. Did you change your mind about that or do you have a way around that? It's obvious the time loop can be fooled in many ways, Zorian said. As such, I thought that maybe if we enclose the area in a pocket dimension and then release the primordial, the time loop might not detect that as a breach. Why do you? Oh, Zack said, eyes widening as he realized what Zorian was getting at. Because the primordial is still technically imprisoned. It would have to breach the pocket dimension we created before the time loop would consider it free. That's the idea, Zorian said with a nod. Would the primordial have any trouble doing that, though? Zack asked with a frown. I doubt we could make a prison anywhere near as strong as these divinely crafted prisons that are currently holding them. We could always layer multiple pocket dimensions around ourselves, said Zorian. At least I hope. I don't know how pocket dimensions work, but they can obviously be stacked on top of each other to some extent. Otherwise, the time loop wouldn't be able to recreate the various pocket dimensions scattered around the world. You know, this raises an important question, Zack said. Where are we going to find someone to teach us how to make pocket dimensions? I mean, that's one of the rarest magical disciplines out there. I don't think I've ever encountered a mage that can create one. I admit I haven't been looking for those secrets very hard, but still. What's worse, you're talking about pocket dimension creation of incredible scale and sophistication. We need someone who is incredibly good at this obscure magical skill, not someone who can barely do it. Finding such a person. I think this could be even harder than gathering all of the pieces of the key. Zorian patiently listened to Zack's concerns, nodding slightly from time to time. It was also very true. And yet, I'm pretty sure I already know a mage that is very good at creating and manipulating pocket dimensions, Zorian said. What? Who? Zack demanded. Silver Lake, Zorian said, sighing heavily. He really didn't want to admit he needed her, but... The crazy witch lady that sent you to kill the Grey Hunter? Zack asked incredulously. The same, Zorian confirmed. Think about it. Why else can't we locate her damn hut? I refuse to believe her wards are good enough to resist a systematic sweep of the whole area from both of us. It's just not possible. And she isn't editing our memories, either, unless she is a godlike mind mage that makes even Arania elders look like children in comparison. I would at least be able to tell my mind had been tampered with after the fact. You think she hides her hut inside a pocket dimension? Zack asked. I don't see what else it could be, Zorian said. Huh. Well, I guess we better find a way to get those stupid eggs soon, then, Zack said with a careless shrug. As if that would be the end of it. Zorian had a suspicion that even if they brought Silver Lake the eggs, this would just be the start of their headaches with her. Regardless, this was the end of that topic for a while. After a short discussion of the best route to take through the rocky labyrinth, they used a flight spell to float down the cliff and onto one of the bigger rocky outcroppings jutting from the valley. From there, they decided to conserve mana by trying to advance on foot. Also, the hunters claimed that the earth elementals did not appreciate people flying over their home and would hurl rocks at people who offended them in such a way. An hour later, they realized they had taken the place too lightly. The landscape held no predators trying to ambush them, but it was exceptionally hard and dangerous to traverse on foot. The ground was rough and uneven, with a labyrinthine arrangement of ridges and rocky outcroppings, and it was often far less solid than it appeared to be at first glance. A careless step could easily result in it crumbling away beneath one's foot, with disastrous consequences. The stones of the valley were very angular and sharp, and sometimes even shaped like knives and caltropes, so any falls or imbalanced flailing easily led to serious injury. Neither Zorian nor Zack ended up injured, but it did make their progress terribly slow and miserable. Ugh, Zack said, casually firing a weak disintegration wave at the nearby rock in order to smooth it out a bit. Once all the edges and spikes were gone, he sat down on the stone and gave Zorian the long look. I must say, those hunters we talked to have quite a penchant for understatements. When they said the elementals were a bit tricky to reach, I expected something easier than this. Well, they've been living in these mountains for months, Zorian said. Maybe for them, this is just tricky rather than a hard slog. But yeah, this is getting a little ridiculous. At this rate, it will take us a whole day to reach the center. So, do we just fly there or what? Zack offered. The hunters said the elementals fire on people flying over their home, Zorian said, shaking his head. I know we could probably survive their barrage, but we're here to ask for their advice. We don't want to piss them off before the talks even begin. Let me try something. Having said that, Zorian quickly fished out a brilliant red potion out of his backpack and downed it. Grey hunters had amazing senses. The most prominent of these, of course, was their ability to sense magic, but that was actually just the tip of the iceberg in regards to a grey hunter's ability to perceive the environment. By now, Zack and Zorian had figured out that grey hunters also had an incredibly acute ability to sense air currents and the vibrations in the ground. Together with their amazing magic perception and other, more mundane senses, it gave grey hunters an almost omniscient awareness of everything in their immediate vicinity. The potions of grey hunter perception that Zack and Zorian had been creating in recent restarts mostly ignored all of these in favor of focusing on the grey hunter's magic perception. This was both because they were treading new ground and had to prioritize, but also because even if they could condense the totality of grey hunters' perception inside a single potion, it was doubtful that either of them could process the information without blacking out. Recently, though, Zorian had decided to experiment a little with the tremor sense part of the grey hunter's perception and commissioned a potion that would grant this ability from the alchemist they were working with. That was the potion he had just drunk, and this was going to be its first real field test. About 10 seconds after he drank the potion, Zorian felt his skin tingle before his awareness expanded. It was muted at first, but that changed quickly the moment Zorian took a step forward. He felt his foot hit the ground in a way he never had before, and the alien sensation almost brought him to the ground right then and there. A strong, vivid pulse emanated from his foot, spreading itself through the rocky labyrinth around him before being reflected back at him. In less than a second, he had a three-dimensional map of his surroundings impressed into his mind. "Give me a few minutes to get used to this," he told Zack. After 15 minutes of pacing back and forth and jumping in place, Zorian was reasonably sure he could crudely interpret what his new sense was telling him. However, even this, which was probably just a shadow of what the real grey hunter was capable of, should allow him to effortlessly navigate through the valley. He motioned for Zack to follow him and they restarted their journey towards the elemental's home. Travel was very fast this time. Every step that Zack and Zorian took sent vivid pulses through the ground around them, mapping their surroundings in Zorian's mind and allowing him to identify which ground was too unstable to support their weight. Zorian felt this was probably how the grey hunter always managed to detect buried traps that Zorian had tried to snare it with, even if they were totally non-magical. Every time it performed one of its damn jumps, the shock waves generated by its landing would pulse through the ground around it, informing it of not just the layout of the ground around it, but also of its contents. But that was a thought for another time, because it wasn't long before they had finally reached the place they had been looking for. They knew they had reached it because the rocks around them crumbled to pieces and 6 earth elementals stepped out of them to block their path. They were a diverse bunch. One was a huge boulder with 4 stubby legs and a pair of massive rocky arms that could probably crush both of them to paste with a single hand swipe. The other was a 6-legged cat lizard, something carved out of shiny stone, its knife-like scales bristling at their intrusion. The third was a giant elongated human head, soundlessly bobbing up and down through the ground, which rippled and flowed like water in its presence. The fourth was an incredibly lifelike obsidian centipede, looking more like an actual monster than an elemental spirit. The 5th and 6th earth elementals, though, were clearly the leaders of the bunch. Both of them were around 3.5 meters tall, fairly humanoid in appearance and armed with actual metal weaponry that looked human-made rather than formed out of stone and the like. One of them had a muscular-looking figure and 4 faces arranged around its head, and carried in its hands a massive sword. The other looked like an old man, with a beard made out of knife-like stones and a long, whip-like tail trailing behind him. This one carried a huge mace in his hands, waving it in the air menacingly. After a few tense seconds, the 4-faced elemental stepped forward towards them. "Forbidden," he told them simply. Zorian kind of expected the elemental's voice to be all booming and gravely, considering its size and composition, but it was actually very crisp and spoken at normal volume. "We bring gifts," Zorian countered, bringing out a box out of his jacket pocket and showing the contents to the giant elemental in front of him. Zack proceeded to do the same. The boxes held a pair of fist-sized red stones, glowing with inner light. The so-called dragon heart stones were highly coveted by some magical creatures, including earth elementals. These stones were hard to acquire, as they could only be found deep within the dungeon as a rule, and humans had no real use for them aside from making expensive jewelry and trading them to creatures that coveted them. Thankfully, Zack had encountered an entire cave full of them at one point, so it was simple enough to acquire some. The moment the earth elementals saw the stones, they quickly changed their tune. The lesser elementals around them tried to scuttle over to have a closer look, but the two leaders quickly caused them to stay back with a few menacing movements. After that, the four-faced elemental spoke again limiting himself to a single word. "Come," he said simply. The four lesser elementals stayed behind, while the two humanoid giants led them to one of the large rock formations that turned out to be hollow. Inside, they found an interior that wouldn't look terribly out of place in a human dwelling. There were tables, chairs, shelves, cabinets and even some potted plants. Items of obviously human making were scattered throughout the area, some of them hopelessly broken. Zorian assumed they were battle trophies to warn human visitors against treachery, but it was hard to be sure. Spirits were notorious for having very alien sense of aesthetics, so maybe the elementals just found the arrangement pleasing to the eye somehow. In the back of the chamber, opposite of the entrance, stood the elemental they came here to see. Stonekald, the elder elemental. Zorian didn't know what he had expected to see. A massive stone monolith with a giant face carved in it? A miniature mountain? A larger version of the humanoid elementals that escorted them to this place? What he definitely didn't expect was to find himself facing what appeared to be a 10-year-old boy. And not one that was crudely carved out of stone, either. Stonekald's form was incredibly lifelike and realistic, and he looked like nothing more than a real human child, if one whose skin was a bit browner than was common this far to the north. There was only one thing hinting at Stonekald's elemental nature: his eyes were solid black, devoid of any internal structure a real human eye should have. It was as if someone set out to make a flawless human replica but then ran out of patience in the end and decided to just socket a pair of polished black gems into the eye sockets and call it a day. "Welcome," Stonekald said, his voice steady and very natural sounding. He smiled reassuringly at them. "We don't get many visitors here, so my manners are a little rusty and I have little to offer you with. I apologize in advance for my poor hospitality. Would you like a glass of water?" Zack and Zorian glanced at each other uncertainly. This was not quite how they had imagined the great elder elemental would behave towards them. "I could go for a glass of water, yeah," Zack said with a shrug. Stonekald nodded to himself in satisfaction and walked over to a nearby shelf, which held several ceramic jugs and a collection of glass containers of various sorts. Stonekald picked up what was clearly a pickle jar at first, but then hesitated for a moment before putting it back on the shelf. He then picked up a proper drinking glass instead. Zorian watched as the elder elemental went about pouring Zack a glass of water, shifting in place nervously. Strange as it may sound, Stonekald worried him a lot more than the two hulking elemental guards that stood vigilantly by the entrance of this place. He didn't look as imposing as them, but his appearance was a dangerous sign all on its own. It was well known that when it came to spirits, the more human-like they were, the more wary one had to be around them. Not necessarily because that made them more powerful, but because it meant they understood humans well enough to pretend to be one. This understanding, in turn, meant they could counter, fight and manipulate humans in a way their more ignorant fellows could not. Stonekald's understanding of human mentality and culture made him a lot more dangerous than he would be if he was just a bit more powerful than your average earth elemental. It was interesting to see this kind of an elemental here in total wilderness, though. Elementals were some of the most ancient spirits known to men, but also one of the most alien and incomprehensible. The vast majority of them couldn't even speak in a human comprehensible manner, Never mind understand human logic and attitudes. This inability of human and elementals to understand one another, coupled with the fact that elementals often occupied land that humans coveted and that elementals typically reacted to provocations by attacking any human within reach. Most elementals had trouble telling human individuals apart from one another, led to many bitter conflicts between the two groups in the past. Elementals that understood humanity to the level that Stonekal did were vanishingly rare and usually involved the elemental in question allying itself to a human community for several generations. Most of them served as protector spirits of various houses or brokered some kind of trade deal with the local authorities in exchange for being left alone. For Stonekal to live in this kind of isolated location, away from any significant human community, yet still know so much about them. It was weird. Zorian suspected he might have originally lived somewhere in the south, but was driven away from his previous home by something. "I hear you bring gifts for me," Stonekal eventually said. "We sure do," Zack grinned. The two of them handed their dragon heart stones to the elemental, who accepted them without any apparent excitement or comment. He rotated the stones in his palms for a few moments before setting them aside on the nearby table. "It is a good gift," Stonekal said. "But is it really a gift? I would never claim to be an expert on humanity, but in my experience your kind is rarely this generous for no reason." "It's a gift," Zack said. "We do want something from you, but we're willing to pay for it. Those stones are yours no matter what you do." "Even if I throw you two out right now?" Stonekal asked curiously. "Even then," Zorian confirmed. "I think I like you too," Stonekal said. "So what is it that you want from me? I warn you in advance that I dislike fighting. Me and my kind will not be your mercenaries, no matter how much you offer to pay." "We're only after knowledge," Zorian said. "Only knowledge?" Stonekal repeated, his black eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet you're willing to pay such a heavy price, just for a chance to petition me for it. It is surely not just knowledge, then. What kind of forbidden secrets are you after?" "We want to know where the primordials were imprisoned," Zack said. Thus far, Stonekal had been very serene and self-assured in his mannerisms. It was somewhat at odds with his childlike appearance, to be honest. However, when Zack mentioned what they were after, Stonekal actually flinched a little. "Why would you seek the ancient blood?" Stonekal asked, leaning forward towards them. "No matter what your reasons are, you're only inviting disaster upon yourself. There is no gain to be had there." "You say that, but I heard there are people who gained great powers by binding the blood of primordials to themselves," Zorian said. It wasn't something he intended to do, but he still wanted to hear what Stonekal had to say about it. "Artifacts of forgotten wars at the beginning of time," Stonekal said, waving his hand dismissively in the air. "Should you find one of these out there in the vast world, unclaimed by anyone, that is obviously a great boon for you. But to tamper with the cages that hold back those of the ancient blood is utter foolishness. Since the time of their imprisonment, no one has ever received gift from their kind." "Are you saying they're actively malicious?" Zack asked curiously. "Do you hate the bugs eating your crops? Do you torture mosquitoes for drinking your blood?" Stonekal asked. "We are all nothing to them, elemental and human both." Right, we're not people to them so they can do whatever they want to us," Zack said. "It's fine, though, we don't really want anything from the primordials themselves. What we're really interested is those fancy pocket dimensions that hold them." "Pocket what?" Stonekal asked, cocking his head to the side in confusion. Apparently he never encountered that particular term and couldn't figure out the meaning from the context provided. "They're cages," Zack clarified. "The thing that holds them outside our reality?" "Ah," Stonekal nodded. "That is less disturbing. But I caution you to forget the idea anyway. Cracking the prisons is probably beyond you. Thankfully. But you might end up accidentally contacting the prisoner or attract unwanted attention. Few such prisons are truly unguarded. We'd really want to take a look at one, anyway. Do you think we could come to some kind of agreement?" said Zorian, motioning towards the dragon heart stones with his head. There are more stones like that where those came from. And we might have more gifts for you besides. Even if I was willing to help her with this, I honestly do not know where the ancient blood was buried, Stornechild said. I cannot help you. The elder elemental disguised as a child glanced towards the stones for a second before shifting his attention back to them. However, he said, I might know a couple of other elementals that would be able to help you. Ah, that's fine too, I guess, Zorian said. I suppose you'd be willing to give this information to us. Stornechild smiled widely. For a price, he said. Break, yes, Glittering River of Stars said, sagging a little. We will agree to let you observe us use the Bakura Gate in exchange for. I can't believe I'm saying this. Time travel-related favors. Finally. It was about freaking time, Zack muttered under his breath. It turned out he hadn't been quiet enough, because River of Stars bristled slightly at his words and immediately turned to him. What would you know? This was a difficult decision for us. Even if you're telling the truth about time travel, we have no way of enforcing this deal. You can renege on it easily enough, and we won't even know an agreement existed in the first place. Yeah, and that's why your elders refused to accept a mere promise alone, Zack shot back. We paid you an absurd amount of crystallized mana and other valuables for this favor. Plus we destroyed that nest of serpent-bearded toads for you as a sign of good faith. And if you're telling the truth about the time loop, none of that will matter in the long run, will it? River of Stars asked rhetorically. Zorian thought about getting involved, but ultimately decided that any words would just be throwing oil into the fire. Truthfully, he understood the doubts and hesitation of the silent doorway adepts all too well. He would feel the same in their position. He actually hadn't expected this negotiation to succeed at all in this restart. He expected it would take at least 2 or 3 times before he learned how to approach them correctly. However, saying that out loud would be the equivalent of shooting himself in the foot. The Ernia probably wouldn't appreciate it much, and Zack would feel betrayed. His fellow time traveler had been getting steadily more annoyed with the colony as they dragged their many feet and the end of the restart inexorably approached, so he probably wouldn't appreciate Zorian taking their side, even as a diplomatic tactic. Thankfully, after staring at each other really hard, Zack and River of Stars decided to mutually back down. Whatever, River of Stars said. The elders have reached their decision, so there is no point in arguing this. Is there anything else? Yes, Zorian spoke up. Do you have something that would help us convince your web we're telling the truth in future restarts? Ah, yes, River of Stars said. There was some discussion about that. We have something. We have no idea how useful it will be to you, since we've never actually made any contingencies in case of time travel being real, but you of all people can afford to do some trial and error on this. Hold on. She was still silent for about 10 seconds, probably engaging in telepathic communication with the rest of her web. Prepare for a memory packet transfer, she told him, before sending a telepathic probe at his mental shields. Zorian allowed her to establish contact, and she immediately shoved a small memory packet at him. He quickly perused the contents, noticing it mostly held meaningless strings of numbers. Well, meaningless to him at least, as well as some kind of detailed map of the region surrounding their web. He unraveled the memory packet and repackaged the information into a memory packet of his own. That way he wouldn't have to worry about it decaying on him the way the matriarch's memory packet did, and then gently pushed at the connection with River of Stars, signaling to her to end the connection. She did as he asked, but she couldn't help but take a quick peek at his memories as she withdrew. Zorian didn't even try to stop her. Instead, he simply pushed a memory of him being stabbed to death in one of the earliest restarts at her memory probe, causing her to flinch a little and hastily break contact. It's rare to see a human so well versed in telepathic conflict, she said, a little awkwardly. Thank you, Zorian said. Can't we see the gate now? Yes, she confirmed, a little more respectfully. Apparently his little show of telepathic sophistication had humbled her a bit. Huh. He made a mental note to challenge one of their elders to a telepathic duel in future restarts, just to establish his telepathic credentials. Maybe they'd look down on them less if he did that. I'll lead the way. River of Stars led them down the twisting tunnels of the Iranian settlement, far deeper into the colony than they'd ever been allowed to go before. There, in a large underground chamber, stood a circular stone platform that held a familiar black icosahedron that was the Bakura Gate. Well, it was familiar to Zorian at least. "You've never seen the Bakura Gate before?" Zorian asked Zack, who was currently slowly circling the construct and inspecting it curiously. In all those countless restarts, it never crossed your mind to seek one out. "No, why would it?" Zack asked, poking the black bars experimentally with his finger. "They don't work and nobody knows how to activate them. I'm no researcher. If countless scholars couldn't get anything out of them, what could I do? It's really similar to the Ebeson one, though. You can clearly tell they were inspired by one of these things when they made theirs. The fact that there is another gate-using group operating around is disturbing," a nearby Arania commented. "You should have mentioned that information earlier when you spoke with us." "Sorry," Zorian shrugged. "I didn't think it was important." "So how will this work exactly? Considering you gathered no less than 15 Iranias here, I'm guessing the activation requires some kind of group ritual." "It is a ritual, yes," the Arania confirmed. Her name was Marvelous Joud, if he remembered correctly. Well, her name was quite a bit longer than that actually, but that was what it shortened to anyway. "It's not the correct way to activate the gate, but it's the only way we know." "What does the ritual involve, exactly?" "Well," she hesitated. "First of all, we need to establish contact with the spirit of the gate." "Wait, the gate has a spirit?" Zorian asked incredulously. He focused his mind sense on the gate for the moment. "I don't sense a mind within it." "Of course you can't," she said. "The spirit is completely disconnected from the Great Web. Its mind is permanently dark, much like your friend's mind is under that spell he keeps constantly active around us. Yet, the spirit is very much real." Marvelous Joud stood a little straighter, giving him a challenging look, as if daring him to contradict her. He didn't. While the idea of the Bakura Gate having a spirit was a bit weird, he would trust the silent doorway adepts on this. They did get the gate to work, after all, unlike everybody else. "So how did you find out about this spirit, then? Do you have someone with soul perception or something?" "The spirit cannot be detected through the soul, either. Its soul is shrouded somehow, and does not show up on casual inspection, even if one is a necromancer. One has to contact the spirit in a very specific way before it will deign to reveal itself," Marvelous Joud explained. That. Well, it certainly explained why this gate spirit had remained an unknown thus far. However, how did you even find out about this, then? Zorian asked curiously. "Did you just tinker with the gate and end up contacting the spirit by accident or?" "Well, there was admittedly a whole lot of tinkering involved. The founder of our web was obsessed with the gate and invested a lot of her time and energies on it. That said, we were rather certain that there was a spirit in there, so our tinkering was directed at establishing contact with the spirit right from the start," Marvelous Joud said. "After all, Bakura gates were said to be able to open up dimensional passages to each other, entirely on their own. That goes against everything we know about magic items. I'm told you're quite an artificer, so you no doubt know that magic items never really cast anything. They can only ever maintain a spell that is anchored to them, and anything else is an illusion achieved by shifting the spell in question into different modes. For the Bakura gates to be able to open and close dimensional passages to any gate in the network, they had to be some kind of spellcaster. And spellcasting requires a soul." Zorian hummed thoughtfully. Pretty solid logic there, he had to admit. By now, Zack had long gotten bored of staring at the gate and walked over to stand beside him. As for the rest of the Arania that weren't explaining things to Zorian, they were busy carting large quantities of crystallized mana to the vicinity of the gate. The local area has insufficient quantity of ambient mana to power the opening of the gate, Marvelous Joud explained. Once the spirit is contacted and starts opening the dimensional passage, we have to evaporate a large amount of crystallized mana and funnel it into the gate or the process will fail. Why not just move the gate deeper into the dungeon? Zack asked. They can't, Zorian said. It's well known that Bakura gates cannot be moved from their spots or they literally fall apart. Most experts are guessing that the icosahedron bars are only the tip of the iceberg and that part of the gate is embedded into the surrounding rocks and the like. Yes, Marvelous Jowd said. We have heard about that, which was why it was never attempted. There was some talk about drilling a hole to the deeper layers near the gate in order to create an artificial manta well. But nobody really knows just how much damage to their surroundings Bakura gates can take before they break down, so that idea never went anywhere. The gate is too precious to risk like that, even if it would save us a lot of money. With all preparations done, Marvelous Jowd excused herself and joined the rest of her fellows in setting up the ritual to contact the gate spirit. After some frantic running and pushing, the Iranians entered into a circular formation around the icosahedron, forming 3 concentric lines around the object. Then they all started casting. 20 minutes later, they were still going at it with no visible change. Eventually Zack couldn't take it anymore and leaned in towards him. Zorian, do you understand anything that is going on here? Zack whispered to him. I'm not an expert on Iranian magic, but they seem to be just repeating the same movements over and over again. Yeah, Zorian agreed, studying the ritual with a frown. It was strange. He could vaguely recognize the spell they were casting as some kind of soul magic ritual, similar to the protection rituals that Alanik had taught him. Things that even a person like him with no soul perception could use. These kind of rituals were lengthy and crude, the magical equivalent of groping in the dark, but sometimes it was enough. Lukav had used something similar when he had analyzed his soul in the past for damage and the like. However, the ritual Silent Doorway adepts were performing didn't look like any ritual spell he knew of. Not that Zorian had witnessed all that many group rituals, but this was still. He suddenly realized what was bothering him. The movements of the Arania weren't nearly as synchronized as they should be. It's not really a group ritual, Zorian whispered back to Zack. They are all performing the same ritual spell independently of one another. And then, when they are done, they just start over and do it again and again. Zack stared at the 15 Iranians surrounding the gate for a few seconds, before leaning towards Zorian again. Are you saying, Zack asked him incredulously, that they are basically annoying the gate spirit into revealing itself? No. That's not what I was getting at, Zorian replied. I think the ritual they use is flawed, and only works when everything aligns just right. But since they don't really know how the gate functions internally, they can't aim for those circumstances specifically. They can just repeat it over and over and hope that it eventually works. Why have 15 of them doing it at once, though? Zack asked. If the circumstances aren't right for one of them, why would it work for the other 14? If you look at them closely, you will see they are not casting the ritual in unison. That's what tipped me off as to what they are doing, actually. They've staggered their casting so that they all finish the spell one after another. I think that, in practice, getting the ritual to work is just a matter of very specific timing. By constantly bombarding the gate with contact requests, they make it more likely that one will actually connect. Ah, I see. So the ritual could conceivably be done by one person alone, but they would likely miss many windows of opportunity and take way longer than a group like this, Zack said. Well, this will be very annoying if we want to use this ourselves. Yeah, Zorian agreed unhappily. Not only was the ritual an Iranian creation, meaning Zorian would have to convert it to human-style spellcasting before he could make use of it, but it was also a very inelegant solution that would be a pain to set up for someone other than Silent Doorway adepts. Even if he hired enough mages for this kind of setup to work, he would still have to teach them the spell itself and then train them to stagger their casting correctly. Even then, they would never be as good at it as the Arania, since they didn't have years of practice with the setup like they did. And the Arania were already at it for half an hour and still going, so he shuddered to think how long it would take under less than ideal circumstances. Just how long would this? A flash of bright light in the center of the icosahedron marked the opening of a dimensional gate instead. The Arania immediately stopped their repetition and scrambled throughout the chamber in a sort of organized chaos, evaporating the chunks of crystallized mana and feeding it to the gate mechanism. The spatial doorway steadily grew, eventually stabilizing into a circular hole in the earth that led elsewhere. Zorian glanced at his pocket watch. It took the Arania about 40 minutes to open the gate, most of which was spent on contacting the gate spirit. Marvelous Jowd scuttled over to them, looking very pleased with herself. "The passage is open," she said. "Does it always take this long to open?" Zack asked. "Oh no. This was quite fast by past standards. Sometimes it takes as much as 2 hours before the gate spirit will deign to respond. This is an auspicious omen for this cooperation." Zack and Zorian looked at each other unhappily. 2 hours. "You can try going through it if you wish," Marvelous Jowd said. "Where does it lead, anyway?" Zorian asked. "Salamnon, not far from the port city of Atamtep," she said. "Eldamar and Salamnon have been engaged in a trade war for a while now, so trading there is quite profitable. You'd probably get a better return by going to more distant lands, though," Zorian noted. "Are there distance limitations on Bakura Gate use?" "In theory, no. In practice, getting to very distant lands is impossible for us. In order to connect with another Bakura Gate, we need to first travel to said gate through some other means and contact its own gate spirit. Only after we receive a sort of mental key from the gate spirit, can we use our own gate to reach it. So each gate has its own secret password and you need to get it before you can travel there." Zack summarized. "It's not very secret. The gate spirit will freely give you its key if you can contact it." "But yes, that is essentially correct," the Arania confirmed. "Sounds like you could use someone that can freely travel over human territory and access distant Bakura gates," Zorian noted. "Well, yes. That is the primary thing that our elders hope to gain from this deal," Marvelous Jowd said carefully. "If you could help us acquire keys to distant gates, this could easily catapult our webs to unbelievable prosperity. Especially if you can secure us a connection to Mycena. There are no Arania there, as far as we can tell, so it's pretty much virgin ground for us to settle. An entire continent worth of it." In the end, the two of them did step through the gate and explored the other side a bit. The silent doorway adepts were, as it turned out, a territorially discontinuous web, with semi-autonomous colonies established around each of the gates they traveled to on a regular basis. The colony back in Eldamar was clearly the main one, though, and it probably wouldn't change anytime soon since the sub-colonies were denied the knowledge of the gate activation ritual. They didn't venture forth from the Iranian colony too much. Two people with an obvious Eldamarian accent were unlikely to be viewed favorably by Salamni's inhabitants. The two countries hated each other, after all. The moment Zorian returned to Cioria, he sat down at his work desk, called up a memory of the ritual, vividly preserved in his mind, and set about understanding it and taking it apart. He respected the Iranian achievement and dedication, but there just had to be a better way of doing this. "Break, I see," mumbled Zorian to himself, turning the telepathic relay in his hand. The innocuous-looking metal plate was connected to the long chain of telepathic relays that his simulacrum left behind him, like breadcrumbs, as it traveled ever further south. He occasionally received reports and memory packets from the simulacrum, detailing the issues his copy had encountered on the journey. "Something good?" Zack asked. "My simulacrum has finally reached Koth," Zorian said. "Or at least the port town of Jajuka, which is generally considered to be the entry port to the region." "Man, finally," Zack said. "The restart is going to end in less than 2 days. I was starting to wonder what was taking him so long." "It's not that simple," Zorian protested, feeling compelled to defend his copy. It was a hard and frustrating journey, and Zorian was honestly grateful to his simulacrum for actually attempting his task seriously instead of doing a half-assed job or giving up halfway through. I know, Zack said, waving his hands in a placating gesture. "There is no need to get all protective of your precious copy. I'm certainly not going to complain about not having to do anything but wait while your simulacrums do all the work." and the traveling speed is bound to improve as your simulacrums figure out better traveling routes in the future. But you have to admit this is kind of disappointing. Yes, Zorian admitted. Especially since all of my simulacrums get dismissed when we enter black rooms and get cut off from the outside world. We really need to figure out how the Ibisans stabilize their gates, or else I'll need to send a simulacrum to Koth at least twice per restart. We could always find a Bakura gate in Koth, send your simulacrum there to open our own gate and then bring a bunch of silent doorway adepts through it to ask the gate spirit for the password, mused Zack. Then we can just go and use the Iranian gate in future restarts. It's a nice idea, but who knows how long it would take to set up? Zorian asked rhetorically. I don't know if you noticed, but the silent doorway adepts are a rather suspicious bunch. I don't know how quickly we can convince them to cooperate in the future, but... Yeah, now that you mention it, I don't really like the idea, Zack agreed. How is your analysis of their contact ritual going? Zorian's face twisted into a grimace. That bad, huh? Zack asked with a grin. I'll say this, there's a reason why they're still using that stupid method instead of switching to something better. I don't think I'll figure out something better anytime soon, Zorian explained unhappily. You might want to work with them instead of away from them in the future, Zack noted. They are annoying jerks, but I'm sure they are as interested in making the contact ritual better as we are, and they have way more experience with it than you do. I guess you're right, Zorian agreed. I think he stopped talking when he noticed his simulacrum was trying to contact him again. Huh? That was fast. Wonder what that was about. Zack? He eventually asked. Yeah. Zack asked curiously. Do you have anything you should be doing in the near future? I'm bored out of my skull and you know it, he said. Why? The simulacrum says he is in the jungle to the west of Jajuka and that he's found a perfect spot for the gate. He's asking if we want to try opening one right now, explained Zorian. Zack thought about it for a few seconds. Or maybe just pretended to think about it. Zack had a flair for dramatics like that. Why not? He finally said, jumping to his feet. Let's go see Koth. Break Gate was an amazing spell in Zorian's opinion. Teleport was arguably a more useful piece of magic, despite the range limitations that forced mages to chain teleports if they wanted to cross any appreciable distance, but it just didn't have the same emotional impact that a dimensional gate did. There was just something emotionally satisfying about crossing continental distances in a single step. For example, Zorian had just followed Zack through the dimensional passage he and his simulacrum had opened, and suddenly went from a hastily secured underground room in Eldamar to a steaming, verdant jungle in Koth. It was louder than he thought it would be. The sheer cacophony of different sounds was impressive, but he imagined that would get tiresome very fast. You have no idea, his simulacrum grumbled, having read his thoughts. I especially hate that one bird that keeps making sounds reminiscent of a dying man's scream. I really wish that it would shut up already. I even thought of tracking it down so I could kill it, but I can't seem to find it in all the foliage. You'd think something that loud would be trivial to track down, but... Anything special we should keep in mind here? Zorian said, cutting the simulacrum off before he could get going. He knew himself, once he started complaining, there would be no end of it. Yeah, the wildlife is absolutely terrifying, the simulacrum said. At one point I saw ants the size of my thumb dismembering some kind of jungle cat, and some of the snakes can fly. No wings or anything, they just kind of silently float through the air like they were swimming through water. And that was in the first hour or so. Yeah, I heard the southern jungles make the great northern wilderness look like a playground, Zack said, picking up a dried branch off the jungle floor and taking a few experimental swings with it. Not sure how much of that is true and how much of it is just southerners trying to make themselves look tough, but there is probably some truth to it. If nothing else, these jungles should be more unpredictable than our forests, since the wildlife is more diverse here. I was also told by the natives that foreigners often get sick not long after coming here, the simulacrum said. It's not a single disease either, there is a whole bunch of things you could contract here. Most of them aren't lethal, but they can leave you bedridden for weeks. Not a problem for a simulacrum like me, but you're going to have to stock up on cures before you start wandering around the region. Great, Zorian clacked his tongue unhappily. Another thing to worry about. Hey, Zack said suddenly. Don't get mad at me, but didn't you say your eldest brother is active around here? Yes, Zorian said, drawing the word out unnecessarily. What's that got to do with anything? Well, Zack began carefully, I know you don't like him, but we're kind of total strangers here. We don't know the language, we don't know the culture, and we don't know how to navigate the local authorities. Your brother, on the other hand, probably does. And he probably has existing contacts all over the place that he could refer us to. Zorian made a really sour face at that. Yeah, he could see the logic in that. Especially since they were on a treasure hunt and his brother was, well, a treasure hunter. He probably could help. And, as much as Zorian hated to admit it, probably would be willing to help. But he didn't want to ask Dayman for help. We don't have time for that right now, Zorian said curtly. The restart is ending soon. Zack chuckled in amusement. But you agree that we should see him? Zack asked, face full of mirth. I say, I didn't think it would be that easy. It's a matter of survival, Zorian's simulacrum grumbled. We can't let our personal grudges get in the way of that. In the grand scheme of things, this is nothing. Well put, simulacrum number 2. Well put. That's good, Zack said. You know, I'm really looking forward to meeting the guy. Maybe punch him in the face if he is as bad as you obviously think he is. Zorian and his simulacrum shared an exasperated look between themselves. Still, he couldn't deny that a part of him was interested in seeing how a meeting between Zack and Dayman would go. He hoped that Dayman still had that competitive streak and challenged Zack to a sparring match or something. Watching Zack wipe the floor with him would be pretty damn satisfying. Not as satisfying as Zorian doing so himself, of course, but pretty close. Plus, he would be lying if he said he wasn't interested in what exactly his brother had been doing down here in the south that occupied him so. And why were his parents coming here to meet with him, anyway? Perhaps, before he sought out Dayman here in Koth, he should have a chat with Mother at the start of the next restart. If nothing else, that way he wouldn't have to search for him all over Koth. Break. The people guarding the Ibisen gate beneath Sioria were a cranky and unhappy bunch. In theory, their task was one of great importance. They were guarding the Ibisen route of retreat, making sure no Eldemarian battle force could close the gate, or even pass to the other side to wreak havoc on the base of Sadamir, their ally. In practice, this was seen as punishment duty. Having been stationed here, they were denied a piece of the action happening above, and thus the glory and looting opportunities that came with it. Besides, what were the chances that the beleaguered Siorian defenders could not only afford to send some of their battle mages down here, but that they also knew exactly where to go in order to find the Ibisen gate site? No, the idea was absolutely hook goblins. Someone shouted. We have hook goblins incoming. No one was worried at first. Hook goblins were ferocious and very deadly if one allowed them to get close, but they weren't particularly tough and went down easily before concentrated spellfire. Indeed, the first wave was nothing special, lulling the Ibisen defenders into a false sense of safety. But as they killed one wave of hook goblins, then two, and then another, they realized this swarm of them was a bit larger than they were used to. Then a couple of mages got a strange headache at the most inconvenient of times and failed their spells, and some of the hook goblins managed to close into melee range. The defenders dissolved into chaos. The troops manning the defenses may have thought the attitude unfair, but there was a reason why the Ibisen leadership considered most of them to be the dregs of their invasion force. The commanders of the force delayed asking for help as long as possible, afraid of what their superiors would say if they proved unable to contain even a simple hook goblin incursion. What a humiliation that would be. That changed when an entire regiment of steel golems came running into the gate chamber, following behind the last hook goblins. Each of them carried a rifle and a belt full of spell bombs, and they were far more resilient than mere hook goblins. More importantly, they signified a clear Eldamarian attack on the gate chamber. This was no longer just an unlucky incursion of dungeon denizens, but an organized assault. In fact, most of the Ebisons suddenly realized that the hook goblins were probably just a setup to soften them up before the real assault force arrived. At this point the Ebison defenders abandoned their pride and tried to contact the small elite Quatachichil had left by the dimensional gate itself. If this was an Eldamarian attack, then there was no shame in summoning Quatachichil to save them. Unfortunately, Zack had already taken care of the gate battle group by then, freezing the war trolls into icy statues and disabling the mages. No one would be coming to save them. The final nail in the coffin was when Zack and Zorian stopped hiding and joined the golems and hook goblins in finishing off the Ebisons. The force arrayed before the Ebison defenders was so overwhelming that many of them surrendered rather than keep fighting till the bitter end. This was a bit of an unforeseen problem, as neither Zack nor Zorian had a heart to just massacre people who surrendered in cold blood, but they also didn't trust them not to start something while they were distracted. After some heated discussion, they ended up solving that by using sleeping gas bombs on them until they were all knocked unconscious. They were just finished with that when a small metal plate hanging off Zorian's hip suddenly shook and Alanic's voice emanated from it, faint but crisp and perfectly audible. "This is Alanic, code Thar 0874. You should be done by now. Is the chamber clear?" "This is Zorian, code Raho 118, said Zorian back into the plate. He personally thought it was kind of unnecessary, but Alanic insisted that these codes were used every time they made contact with one another through the communication plate. "Everything is clear on my end. You can bring everyone into the gate chamber." 5 minutes later, a seemingly endless stream of people poured into the former Ebison base, led by Xvim and Alanic. Some of them were soldiers and battle mages, here to ensure the safety of the gathered people from the dungeon denizens, but most of them were various artificers, scholars, dimensionalism experts, spellcrafters, and so forth. They were all led into the center of the chamber and presented with the Ebison gate. They all gathered around the gate, scrutinizing it intently. Some with obvious enthusiasm and some with professional stoicism. "All right everyone," Xvim told them. "We have only a few hours to figure this thing out as much as possible, so do your best. Mr. Kaczynski and Mr. Nevada here are the leaders of this project, so please report all your findings to them. Don't be fooled by their young age, they very much have the confidence of the authorities in this matter." And thus, almost 100 respected experts gathered from all over Eldamar set about studying the Ebison Gate and how it could be recreated. Chapter 066 Marked Perfection. For nearly 6 years now, Zorian had been living in this endlessly repeating month. It felt longer, to be honest. So many things had happened, and his worldview had undergone such radical changes, that he felt it would only be right if the whole thing had taken place over a decade or more. It made him wonder how the original Zack would compare to the boy he had come to know. They seemed vaguely similar at first glance, but those were no doubt just surface similarities. There was no way that Zack had stayed the same over several decades. Zorian just hadn't known the boy all that well before the time loop and thus couldn't spot the differences. Nevertheless, Zorian had spent a bit over half a decade in the time loop, and in all that time he had never really sat down with his mother to have a chat about things. Some people would have been very ashamed about this, but not Zorian. Indeed, he felt that one of the really nice things about the time loop was that he could virtually eliminate his interaction with his parents. Now, for the first time in years, he was going to strike up a conversation with Mother. And it would be about Damon. He hadn't thought he'd ever want his parents to talk more about his older brother, but life was funny like that sometimes. "Actually, this reminds me of something," Mother said. "Your father and I are going to Koth to visit Damon." "Oh good." He'd been waiting for her to mention their trip to Koth. Thankfully, this wasn't something he had to steer the conversation to. Despite her choice of words, the topic was clearly at the forefront of her mind. She found a way to bring it up in every single restart. "Well, that's a little sudden," Zorian commented lightly. "What brought this up?" If his mother was surprised by him showing actual interest in family matters, she didn't show it. "It's only proper for us to visit Damon from time to time," she said in a lecturing tone. "It has been nearly a year since we've last seen each other. Family ties are important." "Uh-huh," Zorian said in a patronizing tone. "Wouldn't it make more sense for Damon to visit you instead? Seems that would be way easier than you traveling all the way to Koth." "Well," she said, pausing a little, "you're probably right about that. But you know how driven Damon is. He's been really fired up about whatever he's been looking for. There is no way he'd take a break right now, not even to visit his family." "I see," said Zorian. The old, bitter part of him knew that they would never have been so understanding if he had tried to do the same. No, had he ignored his family for nearly a year, missing all the family dinners and such, he would have never heard the end of it. But that wasn't helpful right now, so he pushed such thoughts away and focused on something else. "Since he won't come to you, you'll come to him. Fair enough. Although, if this is a family meeting, how come you aren't making the rest of us take the trip with you? It's not much of a family reunion if more than half of it isn't even there. How do you know we aren't making you come with us?" she asked curiously. Zorian paused for a moment. Crap. She hadn't actually mentioned that part yet, did she? Oh well, this was pretty easy to salvage. "What, you're going to stop me from going to the academy at the very last moment?" Zorian asked her with a raised eyebrow. "Erfertof. Or drag Kirill around a completely alien country where she is liable to pick up 10 different exotic diseases in a matter of days? Actually, it's good that you've reminded me about Kirill," she began, only for him to cut her off almost immediately. "I'll do it," he said. She blinked in surprise, momentarily stunned into silence. "I beg your pardon?" she asked. "You wanted to ask me if I would take Kirill with me to Seoria, right?" Zorian guessed. "I imagine this was why you even brought this topic up in the first place." "I'll do it. I'll take her with me to Seoria." "Yes," Kirill yelled, cunningly hidden just out of sight so she could eavesdrop on their conversation. Zorian rolled his eyes at her outburst, and even Mother felt the need to direct an exasperated look in Kirill's direction. Not that the little imp saw it, she was still hiding and pretending she wasn't spying on them. "That was surprisingly easy," Mother commented, shifting her attention back to him. "I know Kirill has been a little difficult lately. I'm glad you can see beyond that." "Yes, well, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can go back to discussing your actual reasons for rushing to Koth so suddenly," Zorian said. Mother gave him an appraising look. "Why do you care about this so much?" she asked. "Not that I'm complaining about you taking interest in family matters. In fact, I think it's a positive thing. However, you can't deny that this is somewhat unlike you. And you can't deny this trip is somewhat unusual," Zorian immediately shot back. "You're leaving Kirill in my hands for at least 2 months and probably more, which you probably don't like at all." "I'm sure you'll do fine," she interjected. "And you're leaving your company without proper leadership in the middle of the summer, which I'm sure is driving Father more than a little crazy," finished Zorian, ignoring her comment. It wasn't that their business couldn't survive without them for a few months. The company his parents had built was long past the phase where they needed to get personally involved in every little detail or business deal. So long as no crisis popped up, they could easily leave the whole thing to their subordinates for a couple of months. But what if there was a crisis? There was no way his parents were not thinking about this and worrying. Especially Father, who seemed to think most of his workers were either lazy or incompetent. That is, if Zorian had interpreted his father's random grumbling correctly over the years. "Your father has indeed been a little hesitant to leave the company to its own devices for so long," Mother admitted. "But it's..." She hesitated, visibly considering whether to tell him the truth or not. Not for the first time, Zorian wondered if he should just use his mental powers and read her thoughts. He really didn't want to. Even though they didn't get along very well, there was just something very immoral about intruding on his mother's thoughts like that. "It's what?" he asked slowly. "You're very pushy today," she remarked, an unhappy frown on her face. You keep criticizing me for not thinking about the family and our reputation, Zorian said, not able to keep a flash of annoyance out of his voice. Yet now that you clearly have some kind of family emergency on your hands, you are keeping me in the dark about it. I think I have the right to be a little rude. It's not a family emergency, she said, rubbing her forehead in frustration. Not like you're thinking, anyway. It's just... She sighed, deeply and heavily, like she was carrying some kind of great weight on her shoulders. Can you cast some of those privacy wards that prevent sound from leaving the area? This is not something that I want Kirill to hear. Zorian nodded and promptly erected a two-layer barrier, one to block out sound from leaving the room and the other to prevent anyone from stepping foot in it without exerting a considerable amount of physical force. Just in case Kirill decided to be a bit bolder than usual. It's done, Zorian told Mother. Now what's this about? Damon is getting married, she finally admitted. Zorian stared at her for a second, trying to process that. What? That was the big secret? Okay, so he could understand why his parents would consider this to be big news. However, he expected them to be, well, happier about it. The way Mother behaved, he would have thought that somebody had died, not that a wedding had been announced. I don't understand, Zorian admitted after a few seconds. Why is this such a bad thing? If I remember correctly, you even made some pointed noises to him that he wasn't that young anymore and that he should think about settling down. Is there something wrong with the fiancé? The girl is fine, Mother sighed. She's from a powerful family of mages that are movers and shakers in their state. She's basically local nobility. So he's marrying into nobility, then? Zorian asked. Funny, I would have expected you to be ecstatic about that. Mother gave him a rather unamused look. No? You don't like the fact that he's marrying into nobility? Zorian asked, baffled. He honestly didn't understand why Mother disapproved of this so much. This sounded like something she'd be thrilled about. It isn't a good thing that she's local nobility. That only makes things worse, Mother explained. Bad enough that he wants to marry some distant foreigner when there are so many perfectly good local girls he could go for. Daughters of influential families that would be happy to forge ties with us in exchange for getting a genius mage of his caliber into their fold. But never mind that. I could stomach this if this was just random girl he picked up in Koth and brought home. But this girl. She's practically a princess. There is absolutely no way she would agree to move here to Altasia with Damon. Instead, it will be him staying in Koth with her. Ah. Zorian said, finally understanding what the issue was. If Damon married this girl and remained permanently in Koth, his parents would gain nothing from this. Even though he would be marrying into nobility, it would be very distant, foreign nobility. That would only give his parents some mild bragging rights, but none of the practical benefits that marrying some influential family in Eldamar or at least in a country on the same continent would. Plus, if Damon remained in Koth, his parents would only ever see their favorite son and his new family once in a blue moon. The distance between Koth and Eldamar was not something casually crossed. So, Zorian said. I'm guessing you've already tried to talk him out of this through your letters? Yes, Mother said. We wrote to him at length as to why this is a poor idea. No matter how amazing he thinks this girl is, he could do so much better here in Eldamar. But Damon didn't listen to you? Zorian surmised, not without some schadenfreude at their predicament. He said he loves her, she said, shaking her head sadly. He won't budge an inch on the matter. He won't even delay the marriage, much less cancel it. Keeps insisting she's perfect and that he can't let the opportunity slip away. It's too sudden. Why won't he listen to me? Zorian clacked his tongue. He didn't know why she was so surprised. Love always made people unreasonable, and Damon had had his parents doting on him for as long as Zorian could remember. Why would he give up what was apparently the love of his life just because his parents didn't approve? That said, and Zorian couldn't believe he was thinking this, he actually agreed with Damon here. What right did their parents have to get in between him and his new fiancée? It was ultimately his decision to make. though admittedly, it was also his parents' right to drop everything and go all the way to Cuth to try and convince him otherwise in person. I suppose you think that going there and trying to convince him face-to-face will be more effective than letters, Zorian surmised. You can never be as convincing in a letter as you can when being physically there in front of someone, Mother said. But I don't know whether that will be enough, that's all. We still have to try. I know he's young and in love, but he's making a big mistake and he needs to know that. Zorian hummed. All right. I'm not going to get involved with this, and I'm sure you don't expect me to. Thank you for explaining things, at least. Don't spread this around, she warned. I'm telling you this because I know you can keep a secret. There is still a chance we can set this right. All right, agreed Zorian easily. Quick question, then. Do you know what Damon has been working on in Cuth and where he is right now? No, he was always very secretive about that. He was worried someone would intercept his letters and beat him to his prize. The world of treasure hunters is very competitive, from what I hear. We agreed he would come and pick us up in Jajuka once we arrived there. Zorian nodded. About what he expected, really. It made sense for his parents to arrive in Jajuka, since the city was the main entrance port for ships entering the Cuth region from the north, and it made sense for Damon to go and meet them there. Sadly, this meeting was too late for Zorian's purposes, so he needed some clue with which he could track his eldest brother down. Like, say, the identity of this fiancée of his. Do you know the name of this girl he wants to marry? Zorian asked. Or maybe the name of this noble family of theirs and which country it is from? I'm curious. Her name is Arisasiki Tarhamatula, of the Tarhamatula family, Mother said. They are from the state of Haramau, wherever that is. Supposedly they're very distinctive, because their family magic is based around these magical bees that they cultivate. Bees? Zorian asked curiously. Yes. They breed several species of magical bees and use their secret family magic to control and direct them. They are supposedly very versatile, Mother explained. They produce some sort of extremely valuable honey. They can be deadly in battle and they are very good at tracking things down. It's this last thing that led Damon to contact them. He hired their best trackers for his mission, and the daughter of the family head came along with the group. One thing led to another and, well, now we have the situation on our hands. Hopefully her family is as unenthusiastic about this as we are and we can get their help with this. Ha! It would seem that Damon was finally going to learn how unpleasant their parents could really be when they disapproved of their children's choices. In any case, this was probably already enough information to track down Damon. This Tarhamatula family sounded like they would be trivially easy to locate, and they probably knew where Damon was. Still, it might not hurt to see if he could get anything else out of Mother. Maybe Damon let something important slip through in his letters. He opened his mouth to ask another question, only to get interrupted by a knock at the door. All right. Ilsa was here to talk to him. Mother motioned for him to go open the door, and Zorian obliged her. Continuing the conversation would have to wait until he dealt with the Academy representative. Break. Xvim's home was currently host to a very unusual group. Zorian, Zach, Xvim, Alanik, Kale and Tivin were all gathered in Xvim's living room, poring over the various documents Zach and Zorian had collected over the restarts. Everyone who was aware of the time loop was there. Zorian would have normally left Kale and Tivin out of this meeting, Kale because he had told him to keep secrets from him in subsequent restarts, and Tivin because she never fully believed in the time loop anyway, but Xvim and Alanik insisted that they should be involved with things this time. This wasn't something Xvim and Alanik usually did, but Zorian had come to expect these kinds of sudden requests from them lately. Ever since they had started leaving messages and research notes to their future selves via Zorian, their actions tended to vary a lot from restart to restart. Zorian saw no reason to refuse the request, so Kale and Taven got to join them this time. Unlike everyone else, Zorian didn't bother reading any of the documents. There was no need to. He was, after all, the one who had taken all the various notes and records and turned them into the relatively concise reports they were currently reading. Well, He and his simulacrums, anyway, he tended to delegate this kind of work to his copies these days. He just had to remember to read through their finished work at least once, or else they would try to sneak things in as a form of silent protest against being given boring chores to do. But really, what did he have them for if not so he could delegate the boring, time-consuming stuff to them? Well, that is good news, about the Ebison gate, Zach said, leafing through the information they gathered on the structure and the previous restart. I was all but sure that Quatachichil had stuck a human soul somewhere in there to make the gate. I mean, even the Bakura gates require some sort of spirit to function like they do. Bakura gates open portals all on their own, though, Zorian said. The Ebison gates don't. They just keep a portal someone else created open indefinitely. Yes, it's hard to see what a soul in there would do, except maybe provide a power source, Alanik spoke up. It's not like sticking any random soul in there would allow it to open dimensional passages on its own. I guess if you added a soul of a willing mage in there, like Sadamir did with his wife. Kale made a very sour face at the reminder about that. He didn't have a very high opinion of Sadamir's active love and flat out said so earlier. It didn't help that Sadamir had pretty much hunted down all of Kale's friends and would have likely done the same to the boy if he hadn't been scouted out by the academy by then. Then maybe you could improve the efficiency of the structure or something, Alanik finished. Otherwise, there would be little point to it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, Zach said. I mean, if the Ebison gate is just a spell stabilization frame made out of exotic materials and spell formula, that means we can copy their design easily enough, right? Zorian? I'm not sure something this intricate and advanced deserves to be called just anything, Zorian remarked. As for recreating it, well, if it were just you and me working on this, I'd say it would take us years to figure out how to reproduce it. But since we'll be using the whole army of experts approach we used in the previous restart, it will still take at least a year, but probably not more than one. Still a year. Zach whined, visibly disappointed. Why? The short time during which we have access to the gate is really hampering us, Zorian explained, clacking his tongue unhappily. We may have an army of experts, but they only have a couple of hours before the end of the restart to examine the gate. There is only so much they can do in such a short time. Why not just attack the base before the end of the restart? Taven asked. Is this Quatachichil really that unbeatable? Yes, Zach and Zorian answered in unison. Okay, no need to pile up on me, she grumbled. And is there no time during which he's absent from Seoria or something? Zorian was just about to explain why that wouldn't work when he remembered something. He reached for a nearby stack of papers and started quickly leafing through a timeline of the invasion he and Zach had painstakingly made. A definitive timeline was, of course, completely impossible. Things changed often, depending on what Zach and Zorian did in any particular restart. However, certain things seemed very resistant to change, and virtually always happened on schedule if they didn't specifically try to disrupt them. He was sure he remembered something about. Ah! Here, Zorian said triumphantly, pointing at one of the paragraphs. At the beginning of the third week of the restart, Quatachichil has a tendency to return to El Quanabasa and stay there for 3 whole days. So long as we don't disrupt the invasion too badly until then, he's likely to do just that in this restart too. Then, if we manage to seize the Ebison base at the very start of this period, we will have 3 whole days to study the gate without interruption. That's a big if, Zach pointed out. You're talking about attacking the base while it's fully staffed and defended. Trust me, that's very different than taking out those bunch of incompetents that loiter around the base during the invasion itself. And you're talking about doing it without giving them enough time to raise the alarm and summon Quatachichil back. Or get reinforcements from Sadamir's mansion, for that matter. Yeah, said Zorian thoughtfully. Alanik's soldiers alone aren't going to cut it this time. We're going to need to hire Iranian mercenaries if this is ever going to work. I'm pretty sure I can find a web that would be interested if we offer enough payment. And Sadamir? Alanik asked. Oh, that one is easy, Zorian said. He's still a mayor of Nyazov Vary. We just create a big enough disturbance in the town and wait for him to show up, as he surely must. Then we kill his bodyguards and kidnap him in broad daylight." There was a brief silence as everyone gave him strange looks. "What?" Zorian said defensively. "You've got a better idea. You've become a scary person, Zorian," Taven remarked. "Why kidnap?" Alanik asked. "Why not just assassinate him?" "He cryptically hinted that he was very hard to kill when I spoke to him," Zorian said. "I don't know what magic he used for that, but it's possible that just killing him wouldn't work. So I figured it was safer to just put him to sleep and keep him that way for as long as necessary." "Well, I at least approve of this course of action," Alanik said. "If nothing else, this will give me a chance to interrogate Sadamir once he has been captured. I note we've never really done that properly in any of the past restarts." "Yeah, it was never really a priority, and the man's plans were all pretty crazy anyway," Zorian shrugged. "Crazy or not, he clearly had plenty of talent and magic," Kale said. "You shouldn't just limit yourself to questioning him about his crimes and links to El Quanabasa. You should interrogate him for everything he knows about necromancy and other magic as well." Unsurprisingly, this made him the new target of everyone's strange looks, much like Zorian had been earlier. "Look," Kale said, trying to sound calm. "I probably hate this monster more than anyone in this room. Chances are that a portion of his knowledge comes from the very people I knew. People he killed and, in all probability, whose souls he interrogated for secrets. Magical and otherwise. But that's precisely why you should do the same to him. It's..." He struggled for a moment to find the right word. "Just," Alanik offered quietly. "Appropriate," Kale corrected. "It's appropriate for him to suffer a similar fate." Fitting. It took another 2 hours for them to create a basic outline for a plan of attack on the Ebeson base. The biggest surprise to Zorian was that Taven wanted to participate in the fighting. Specifically, she wanted to join the soldiers and battle mages that Alanik would be mustering for the operation. Alanik provisionally agreed to this, though he told her he would throw her out of the battle group immediately if she proved incapable of following the chain of command. The tiny flinch she did after hearing that told Zorian that she'd likely had problems with that in the past. But she agreed with his condition anyway. In the end, the meeting was dismissed and everyone went their own way. Except for Zorian, who stayed behind to talk to Xvim about something. So, Xvim began. "We're alone, Mr. Kaczynski. What is it that you wanted to talk to me about that you didn't want the others to overhear?" "First," Zorian said, taking out a notebook out of his jacket pocket, "take a look at this." The notebook was, of course, the very list of people to interrogate for secrets that Xvim had given him in one of the previous restarts. The one that had caused him so much self-doubt and worrying. Xvim carefully started leafing through it, his frown deepening ever further as time went by. Zorian patiently waited for him to finish, not saying a word. "I suppose I'm the one who gave you this," Xvim said, giving Zorian a questioning look. Zorian nodded. "I see. Then, should I assume you're here because you've already gone through the entire list and now need more names?" "No," Zorian said, a little more forcefully than he intended. "No, I've done no such thing. I managed to get a couple of people there to willingly teach me what they knew, despite your assurances that they wouldn't do that under any circumstances. I tried to convince the others to do the same, but when they refused, I just moved on to other things. I haven't invaded the mind of anyone on that list. Well, aside from an occasional surface scan." Xvim stared first at Zorian, and then at the notebook in his hands, staying silent for a while. Finally, he wordlessly handed the notebook back to Zorian. "That," Xvim decided, "is relieving to hear." Zorian blinked in surprise at the statement. "I don't know whether my past self would agree with me." "Probably not, if he gave you that list," Xvim continued. "And I can definitely see the logic in giving you that list, even though I don't like it. All that said, I don't understand what the purpose of this talk is. If you don't need more names, why did you show me that book?" "I have decided I won't be going after these people," Zorian said. and what a load off his chest that was, too. Not the way your past iteration had urged me to do. I'm not sure whether to praise you for your ethics or berate you for being too soft to do what has to be done, Xveen grumbled, shaking his head slightly. Then again, the way you phrased that makes me think you still have some sort of designs for the list. I'm guessing that's where I come in, yes? See, the idea is this: I want you to talk to these people and try to get their secrets yourself, Zorian told him bluntly. He paused for a moment. And then share these secrets with me, of course. Xveen looked at him like he was stupid for a moment, then let out a brief chuckle of amusement. Mr. Kaczynski, Xveen told him, if I could get these people to share their secrets with me like that, don't you think I would have already done so? Not for all of them, Zorian pointed out. Some of them are clearly on the list because you thought I might be interested in what they had to offer, but you probably don't care for their specialties. I doubt you even tried to trade for what they have to offer. That much is true, Xveen admitted. As for the rest, how much did you really offer them for their life's work? Zorian asked. I'm always fair in my dealings, Mr. Kaczynski, Xveen said with a frown. Yes, but what if you gave them an outrageous offer? Zorian smiled. The collected secrets of dozens of mages. More money than they'd ever seen in their life. Rare materials that cannot be obtained on the open market. A chance to hire a group of archmages for a task. That sort of thing. Xveen raised an eyebrow at him. If you can offer all that, why do you need me? See? Zorian said, pointing straight at his face. That reaction there. Disbelief and amusement. You know I'm a time traveler, and you still can't take me seriously when I say what I offer. How do you think other people would react? Those kind of claims, when they come from Mirzak, really are outrageous to people. And not in a good way. We're just teenagers with no known accomplishments. We only have borrowed fame from our families to fall back on, and that can only take you so far. You, on the other hand, are a highly respected archmage. They know you. You're friends and acquaintances with some of them. It won't be so ridiculous if you offer these things. It will still sound rather ridiculous, Xveen pointed out. People will think I've gone mad. Well, more than they already do, anyway. Don't worry, your reputation will be restored at the end of every restart, Zorian told him. How very comforting, Xveen deadpanned. They were both silent for a while as Xveen considered the idea. There is some merit to it, Xveen eventually admitted. Some of these people. I don't think there is anything I could offer them to share their findings with me. Most, though, probably have their price, if one were willing to go high enough, and the offer looked credible. And on that note, are you sure you can really deliver what you offer? Take money, for example. I'm not sure you understand what kind of sums are exchanged between high-level mages on deals like these. What sounds like an outrageous sum to you might look like pocket change to them. Zorian didn't try to explain. He simply reached into his pocket and handed Xveen a bank check he had made for the occasion. Xveen glanced at it and immediately raised his eyebrows at the sum written on the piece of paper. That's a lot of zeros, Xveen said after a short pause. No, Mr. Chow, Zorian said with a toothy smile. That is just pocket change. Break. The coming week was a relatively busy one, with many things happening. An invasion of the Evason base beneath Seoria was being organized. The Silent Doorway adepts were being convinced that time travel was real and that they should give them access to their Bakura Gate and associated experts again. Some changes were being planned for their tour of Altasia's various black rooms, and the plot to convince various experts to part with their closely guarded secrets was slowly going forward. Thankfully, it was no longer just Zorian working alone on all these things, as it once was, so this kind of workload was easy enough to maintain. That said, all of this was mostly irrelevant to Simulacrum number 2, whose job was simply to go to school and then disappear at the end of the day. Strangely enough, number 2 didn't mind his task. He knew that his predecessors had been rather unenthusiastic about their task, but he personally found it just to his liking. Maybe it was because the original had created him right after he had finished another negotiation session with the Silent Doorway Adepts, but he felt this sort of relaxing task was just what he needed. Still, actually paying attention to classes was out of the question, so he picked up a couple of advanced books to read during lectures and breaks. It was during one of the breaks that he found Nilu watching over his shoulder curiously. "What?" he asked. He was rather surprised. Really, this wasn't like in the previous restart, where the earlier simulacrums ended up secretly befriending her during their short lives. He was sure of it. So why exactly was she taking interest in him and his reading choices? "Why are you reading dictionaries of Xlodic languages?" she asked curiously. "Oh. Right. Of course she would be interested in that. She was from Xlodic herself, after all." He had found out a fair amount about Nilu in the previous restart, partially because Nilu herself felt the need to tell him about herself and partially because he had needed to reconstruct what his simulacrums had done by subtly questioning people and reading their thoughts. Nilu Manuel Jeter, Nilu for short, was a daughter of a regular, but very wealthy house from Kanamar, one of the bigger Ecosian successor states on the Xlodic coast. The darker, bronze-colored skin of hers hinted at it, but that kind of complexion was also common in southern Altasia and the Shivan archipelago, and thus not a dead giveaway. The blue, tattoo-like markings on her cheeks and forehead were the signature trait of her house, and nobody knew if they were merely cosmetic or held some kind of secret Jeter family magic. For Nilu to travel all the way from Xlodic to Aldemar in order to study magic was rather unusual, to say the least. It wasn't like Xlodic didn't have plenty of prestigious academies of its own. It was once the heartland of the Ecosian Empire after all, and though the cataclysm hurt the region badly, that still counted for something. Nonetheless, Nilu's father decided to send her all the way to Aldemar for her magical education. Officially it was because Seoria's academy was the world's most renowned magical academy and he wanted nothing but the very best for his daughter, but rumor had it she had been involved in some kind of scandal back home and he wanted her out of people's sight for a while. Sending her to a distant but prestigious magical academy was probably a good solution in his book. That was just a rumor, though, and even if Nilu was here in unofficial exile, one certainly couldn't tell that by her behavior. She seemed quite happy to be in Seoria, and never gave the slightest amount of indication that she was bitter about her family or home. It was possible that the rumors were just rubbish in this case and that she had just really wanted to go to a foreign country for her education and her father couldn't bear to refuse her request. Well, no matter. Not his business anyway. As for him reading Xlodic dictionaries, well, he was actually trying to make himself somewhat useful by helping Simulacrum number 1, who was steadily making his way to Koth right now. He had been in mental contact with his fellow Simulacrum for a while now, and while the dictionaries he was reading were kind of outdated, it was better than nothing. Of course, he couldn't really tell that to Nilu. "I was thinking of visiting Xlodic once I graduate from the academy," he told her instead. "Really?" she gasped. "Oh, that's wonderful. Trust me, it's a beautiful place. You should visit my place when you do. I can give you a tour of the city and tell you where to go if you want to see something interesting." Now that was an interesting idea. Didn't Zack say that it was easy to convince Nilu that time travel was real? Maybe they should recruit her as a guide when they went looking for the piece of the key that was supposedly lost in Xlodic. She probably wouldn't be able to help them too much, but she could at least make sure they didn't make any major social blunders and act as a translator for them while they gathered their bearings. And maybe put in a good word for them to her house, so they could hopefully tap into their contacts throughout the region. "I'll keep that in mind," Zorian said. "Say, do you think you could help me translate a few things? I have this list of phrases that I got from my friend who has been to Xlodic, but I can't seem to find them in the books." Break. Once Zorian's simulacrum had finally reached Kuth again, actually tracking down Damon proved to be quite easy. Admittedly, this was only because he had managed to get the identity of his fiancée out of Mother. Turns out, Damon was not quite as driven as Mother imagined him to be. Instead of ceaselessly pursuing whatever goal he came to Kuth for, He was taking a bit of a break to spend time with his girl at the Tarantula family estate. Well, considering he had been doing that for several weeks now, a bit was probably an understatement. Anyway, all Zorian had to do was talk to a high-ranking member of the house, ask him where Damon was, lift the information straight from his mind when he claimed he didn't know anything regarding the matter, and then make his way to the place with Zack in tow. Thus it was that the two of them found themselves waiting in front of the entrance to the Tarantula estate, stubbornly insisting that they wanted to talk to Damon and ignoring the guards who were equally stubborn and claiming they'd never seen the man in their life. In all honesty, Zorian was kind of amazed they hadn't tried to violently get rid of them yet. He knew that houses back in Eldamar tended to be a bit trigger-happy when faced with visitors who couldn't take the hint. Though if they did, Zack and Zorian were entirely capable and willing to take them down and then keep doing the same to any reinforcements the house sent their way. Maybe they could sense that somehow. Eventually, a rather severe-looking middle-aged woman in white and orange clothing arrived to see what the disturbance was. She said her name was Alana, but she made no mention of what her position in the house was and what sort of authority she was wielding. "You say you were Damon's younger brother?" she asked with an arched eyebrow. Alana actually spoke grammatically perfect Ecosian, unlike most people they found in Koth, though her accent was pretty thick. "Yes, Zorian Kaczynski." "You can show him this as proof," said Zorian, handing her a rolled-up painting that he had shamelessly stolen from Damon's room back in Surin. The painting depicted 3 female students from Damon's year at the academy, scantily dressed and posing suggestively. He had supposedly gotten that painting as a gift from the girls in question, and always kept it displayed prominently in his room, ignoring Mother's objection that it was obscene. The woman slowly and dramatically unfurled the painting, stoically scrutinized the contents with a raised eyebrow, and then gave him a mildly amused look. "I see," she said. "If nothing else, you seem to have a similar sense of humor as he does. I'll be sure to show this to him. I'm sure there is an interesting story behind it." "Oh, absolutely," Zorian said with a sunny grin. "I'm sure he'd love to tell you all about it." About 15 minutes later, Alana returned with Damon in tow. It had been a while since Zorian had last seen his brother, but he hadn't changed much in the meantime. He was still the same tall, handsome guy with a muscular, athletic build and a confident swagger. Zorian would recognize him just about anywhere. Zorian had changed a lot since their last meeting, however. He had become good enough at magic to notice that Damon had discreetly cast a divination spell at him to confirm he really was Zorian and not a disguised imposter. He had gotten good enough at his mental powers to immediately tell when he was in the presence of another psychic individual. He closed his eyes momentarily. Damon was psychic. Of course. The one thing that Zorian was somewhat special at, and Damon had to have it too. To tell the truth, though, he had somewhat been expecting it. It would certainly explain where that incredible social sense and persuasiveness of his had come from. Even as a child, Damon could wade through social situations that even adult men would struggle at. How good was Damon at controlling his gift, though? Zorian felt an urge to send a telepathic probe at him to check, but restrained himself. Maybe later. The situation was still a little tense right now, no sense in making himself even more suspicious. Also, if Damon was open and had some measure of control over it, then he should have very much noticed that Zorian was like him. Why hadn't he said anything to him or his parents? Yeah, he definitely needed to confront him about this at some point. "Zorian?" Damon said. "Is that really you? Who else could I be?" Zorian shot back. "I know we haven't seen each other in a while, but have you really forgotten what your little brother looked like already?" Damon laughed awkwardly. "No, of course not. It's just that this is very unexpected. Shouldn't you be in school or something?" "I should," Zorian admitted. "But I decided to take a trip to Koth instead. Then I remembered you're already here and thought it would only be polite to drop by and say hi." "Uh-huh," Damon said. He gave him a measuring look. "Tell me honestly, are you here on our parents' behalf?" "No," Zorian said, shaking his head. "So you're not going to try and get in between me and Arissa?" he asked. "No," Why would I? Said Zorian. I'm happy for you. You're on your own when it comes to dealing with mother and father, though. You little brat, Damon growled. Then why the hell did you pick that of all things as your proof of identity, huh? It was a lovely painting, Alana commented stoically beside him. You must have been very popular in your school days, Mr. Kaczynski. Damon ignored her comment in favor of focusing on Zorian. It sure seems like you're trying to get me in trouble here, is what I'm saying, he told Zorian. All I know about how to properly treat a brother I learned from you, brother dearest, Zorian said with a sickly smile. Oh? Alana asked. It sounds like you have some fascinating stories. Yeah, there are some nice ones, Zorian said. My personal favorite is when he thought it would be funny to constantly lock his little brother out of the house for hours on end. Actually, I just wanted the house all for myself, and you didn't want to go out and play outside like a normal kid, Damon pointed out. Besides, I actually paid a price for that one. Yes, that's why I said it was my personal favorite, Zorian said. What exactly happened? Zack asked, causing Damon and Alana to truly focus on him for the first time since the conversation started. He had been uncharacteristically quiet up until this moment, just observing the interaction from the sidelines and not saying anything. Zorian learned how to pick locks just so he could enter the house again, that's what, Damon explained with annoyance. I mean, what kind of kid does that? And then some stupid police officer that had no idea he was trying to break into his own house sees him and arrests him for burglary. Man, was Mother pissed about that when she found out. At both of us, really. But especially me, since I was older and was supposed to be watching him instead of chasing him out of the house to do my own thing. Perfectly understandable, Alana commented. Yeah, I was a bit of a brat as a kid, Damon said dismissively. Who wasn't? Anyway, come inside, you two. I must say, it's pretty impressive that you were able to travel all the way here from Eldamar. Pretty irresponsible too, Alana added from beside him. Well yeah. But I'm the last person who can lecture people about that, Damon said. Man, compared to some of the stuff I did when I was their age, this is nothing. Alana raised an eyebrow at him. Fumbled Damon, before rounding back at Zack and Zorian. And what the hell are you two waiting for? A written invitation? Get inside already before I dig myself an even deeper hole. I swear, this just isn't my day. With that, Damon turned towards the actual building of the estate and marched towards it, trusting them to follow after him. With a careless shrug and a smile at a job well done, Zorian followed after him.